Welcome to the Higher Ed Athletics Podcast with Travis Smith. Today, I'm joined by the Colgate University Vice President and Director of Athletics, Dr. Nicki Moore. Dr. Moore, thanks for being on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, I'm excited to have just talk about Colgate and really your background and just some. It's an interesting institution and really excited to have you on the podcast. Yeah, before we get to Colgate, I do just want to kind of talk about your background. So you were a successful track and field student athlete at the University of Missouri and served as the SAAC president there too. So I'm curious how those two roles really shaped your thinking when deciding to even pursue a career in college athletics, because you had that SAAC president experience. You also succeeded as a really good student athlete. I'm sure those two things shaped you.
They certainly did. In some ways I didn't. I still kind of maintain that I don't know that I really decided to pursue this profession, but that it kind of, I don't know that it pursued me, but I do think that it, I am grateful that I found it or it found me. And when I think about my experience as a student athlete, I had played year-round sports, softball, basketball, track in high school, and before that, and loved it. But I was a little bit tired of it, to be honest. I was like, maybe I just want to go be a normal student, and so, but I had been I was recruited walk-on to begin with at Missouri, and so I thought, well, I'll try it, and then if I don't like it, I'll just stop doing it. And so I rushed. And so it was in a house and the whole bit too. And with my plan to leave if I didn't, anyway, I still hadn't left, but I had a wonderful experience there. I loved the people that were associated with my athletics experience. I had an amazing coach, a set of coaches. And I think the SAAC piece, it gave me a space, I think, to start defining myself or learning to believe that I was a leader. I think it in some ways it put me in that position, and then the identity maybe followed a little bit. So, as I did have the opportunity to kind of get back into athletics, it wasn't in any way a difficult sell for me to believe that investing in the lives of student athletes and coaches was a good use of my time in life. So
I'm surprised to hear you're a walk-on after the awards that I saw that you had won the accolades as a track and field student athlete. So I thought you were this coming out of high school, you probably had all these offers.
Interestingly, I had offers. I did have offers in basketball and softball, but I really wanted to go to Mizzou. And my dad had gone there, my sister was there, and so I grew up in a tiny little town in Northeast Missouri, and so had done well in track at state and whatnot, but it was a very small school, 2A school in Missouri. And so I got better fast, with proper training. Like I remember in high school, the most intense training that we did was the week between district and state. Like that's when you're supposed to be peaking, which we know now, but I didn't know that then. I mean, we trained really hard that week and went into state tired. Who knew? But anyway, so yeah, it was I got better fast, and it was a really great experience for me.
I have family that went to Mizzou, and half my family's from Lee Summit and Kansas City area.
Good.
So I'm in Missouri. I can say that I was a Chiefs fan before they had Patrick Mahomes. I have the old school Chiefs gear to prove it.
Nice.
So Mizzou is a beautiful campus too.
It is.
Well, let's shift gears to Colgate now. So can you give the listeners and the viewers just a quick profile of Colgate University, maybe the size, location, the type of institution, and then, from an athletic side, how many sports, and then after that, maybe what you love most about the institution and getting to lead the athletic department.
Yeah. It's such a great place. And I had no idea. I just didn't, like I said, I grew up in Missouri. I did not have much exposure to the Northeast or the sort of elite educational opportunities that are here. And so I'm pleased to get to tell others about it. It's a campus of about 2,900 students, and 630 or so of those are student athletes. So student athletes represent about, not quite a quarter of the population, but at least a fifth of the population here on campus. There are 355 academic staff, and so it's like a 1 to 12 ratio of student to staff or to faculty ratio, which is really reflective in the student athlete and student experience here. When you talk to our students, one of the first things they talk about typically, regardless of how else they're involved on campus, they talk about those relationships with faculty that have been so meaningful to them. It's about 575 acres, which works out to be about 19 students for every 1 acre, which is just kind of an interesting, random sort of fact, but it's expansive, it's beautiful, it's just a gorgeous campus. We have a lake on campus, it's set on a hill, and our athletics operations are fairly centralized, so everybody runs into each other on a regular basis, which is really nice. Let's see here, we have 25, it's a private liberal arts Division I FCS school. And it's located in Hamilton, New York, and the population there is about 4,200, 4,300 people. So small. It's a village, literally a village. My friends who come and visit and family have often said, you live in a Hallmark card, it's which is kind of true. And about 9 months out of the year, it's absolutely gorgeous. And then we've got 25 teams. We have 18 head coaches, 16 sports, if you're sort of counting, both, we've got men's, women's lacrosse, men's, women's basketball, that sort of thing. So, but, some of we have hockey, we've got lacrosse, we've got field hockey, we've got swimming, diving, the whole 9 yards. So, and then let's see, you asked, what do I love most? The institution, it probably goes back to that student faculty ratio and the student experience here. But there is a genuine investment in the success of every student on this campus. If you get in here, people are going to care about you, and they're going to sort of shepherd you, to find success, whatever that is. If it's research, there's a ton of undergraduate research that happens here. If it's dance, if it's theater, if it's athletics, there's a great deal of support for students pursuing their passions here. And I love that. From an athletics department standpoint, that was hard. I was thinking about that, but the thing I think for me that resonates a great deal is that it's a community, and it's a community of high achievers, and really who are bound by a common vision. I mean, the people that I experience here that are on our staff here are hard workers. They are eager to help in whatever way. Like I suspect many of them were utility players on whatever team it was that they grew up playing on, because they're willing to hop in and give and support each other. And so that's, I think, the parts that I really love the most.
Well, I just noticed on Twitter, whenever you're out at, whether it's hockey or lacrosse, and just seeing the backdrop of the university, and then especially when it's snowing, it really is like a Hallmark card, because some of the pictures you would post whenever it was snowing, I was like, that just looks like a magical place right now.
It is.
And when I was doing some research on the institution, I was just blown away by some of those facts. And we talked about before hitting record, that I'd spent three plus years at University of Indianapolis, and also got my start there as a intern when I came out of undergrad. And the institutions are very similar in the amount of sports they offer, and the faculty student ratio. That is a big deal, that the students, because I was the academic advisor for all of our student athletes, and they mentioned that on recruiting visits. They mention it whenever they leave. They love how tight of a community a campus is, not just the athletic department. So that's another thing that drew me to interview you and Chris King at Robert Morris. Just it's one of those things that maybe not a huge D1 experiences. Every institution has its own great things, but I think that's one of the great things about a smaller institution with an athletic department. And I want to kind of shift gears towards another comparable institution that it made me think of, and that's DePaul University. And in this way. So in addition to overseeing college athletics, what we know as intercollegiate athletics, you also oversee club sports, intramural and recreational programs at Colgate, the outdoor education program, and a physical education program for all students. So not just Colgate student athletes. Now that's not typical at the D1 level of a kind of an oversight responsibility. I don't believe, at least not yet. But it reminds me of a DePaul University where Stevie Baker Watson, for example, her role is similar to that. What is overseeing those additional areas? Is that kind of a learning curve for you when you took the position? I'm guessing you learned about it on the interview. And do you have a different approach to maybe being the administrator of a non-intercollegiate athletics area of the campus than you have to for your actual intercollegiate athletics?
Mm-hmm. It was a learning curve. In fact, I feel like I'm still on it. And I'm about to round out my third year. And I mean, I'm still on the learning curve for everything else too. So, but it really was also a welcomed, opportunity. And part of one of the things that I'm finding that sort of drives me, and one of the things I like about leadership, I'm finding, is that I do like to have influence. I like to have an opinion and a perspective, and I like to try to sort of, and I think it's a good one. And so it's nice to have that chance to try to influence every student's opportunity on this campus. Every single student on our campus has to complete 2 credits of physical education while they're here. And so to be able to try to make sure that moment that they intersect with athletics or intramurals or recreation or PE is really positive and is something that is contributes to their experience as a student, is a privilege. And so we're still figuring that out and still working on making it ever better, as we are in everything else. But it's been a good experience. And one of the things that's pretty cool about Colgate is all of our head coaches, some of our administrators, some of our sports medicine staff even are actually considered to be athletics faculty. And so we have a voice in faculty meetings and faculty governance. We sit on faculty governance committees, and it's both actual and symbolic of the integration of that sort of athletics and academic experience for our students and for us. And so it feels like a true partnership, as opposed to, an athletics department that's sort of over on the side doing their own thing and kind of managing that connection, between academics and athletics. Let's see here. And you talked about different approach. There is a little different approach, because when you get right down to it, there are resources, to be managed. And one of those resources is my time. But just like I have a team of sport administrators who are, that direct reporting line for our head coaches, I also have an administrator who is, over the entire sort of unit, is the director for physical education. We have an outdoor education, which we have this great outdoor education program, by the way, which is so cool to get to be a little bit a part of that. Anyway, that person oversees that. And then one of my executive team members, is a reporting line there. So, but, I try to engage when I'm able to. Yesterday we send out a Raider Insider, kind of a newsletter, and we always have a PE rec outdoor education component along with our other sports. And I noticed that we highlighted the champion of our intramural badminton tournament. And so I shot her an email and said, hey, congratulations. And, it's just cool to have an excuse to interface with even more students on our campus.
Yeah, it really is an interesting setup, and one that I've gotten to notice just from where I've grown up and areas I've been at. But it'll be interesting to see if we ever get a trend where some more Division I integrate. It's a great way to integrate, as you mentioned, your athletic department with the rest of the institution. So that's great to hear about. Before leading Colgate, though, you worked in athletic administration at both Oklahoma and North Carolina. So there are some similarities, I'm sure, but such as Colgate, I think having close to the same number of sports and athletes as Chapel Hill But what is the transition like as far as going from those large Power Five resource institutions to a Colgate, coming from Oklahoma and North Carolina?
Yeah. It wasn't that hard. I wondered about that too. And there are days when I'm like, it's shocking to me that they handed the keys over to me, to this place, because I didn't have a liberal arts experience and all of those things. But nevertheless, it's, we're in some ways pursuing the same goals. We're pursuing the same things at North Carolina as we are here for the most part, but on it sort of on a different scale. But all of our peers, our Patriot League peers, are resourced about the same. And so, though our resources are quite different in terms of financial resources, we're not, I'm not trying to hire the same kind of coaches. Well, that's not necessarily true. But we're maybe fishing in different ponds for recruits. And we offer a unique experience. And so in some ways we're competing in the spaces we need to compete, and we have the resources we need to do that. So it is different, and it is an adjustment. But I would say that, like, the thrill that I have on, a Saturday afternoon at a football game, or, a Friday night at a hockey game is not any different than, than we had at North Carolina or Oklahoma. The number of people are different, the other resources are a little different, but it's the core element of what's happening is very similar.
Yeah, I had recently Bubba Cunningham on the podcast, and I talked to him about the shift from a Tulsa or a Ball State that he led, and then getting in North Carolina, and that's a really similar answer and perspective that he had. And seeing the cool thing, it kind of goes back to the basketball, men and women's basketball tournaments, for example, and other sports, but just the recognition on nationally exposure of basketball gives you, and seeing Colgate, have such a great season and being in the tournament. That's just cool for a smaller institution to be able to see that. And you all had one of the best players in college basketball, I believe, this year too. And that's a great way to look at it. Of being able to, every place is great in their own way. And so I think the biggest thing, and I had Amanda Braun from Milwaukee on, and one of her conversation pieces was about just how the oversight of football might look different in the future. And maybe that's in my opinion, maybe that's one of the biggest differences, because if you look at the other sports in Division I, I mean, your lacrosse team could go to anywhere in the country and compete and win. And I think the biggest one is just that resource level of football. And even FCS football teams can beat FBS football teams. So, but the resources is the biggest difference. So, but I appreciate that answer. So in 2020, I feel like a theme of this season of the podcast, I think and it's probably another reason why I seek out certain institutions, has gone through a rebrand at some point, where I'm studying that in my doctoral program, and it's an interest of mine. And in 2020, Colgate introduced a new athletics identity. Can you maybe walk us through what that process was, as far as who was included, what the goals were, and ultimately, what are some of the changes that were made?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I remember when I first started looking at this position, I noticed that there was what appeared to be kind of a disconnect between the athletics branding and the university's branding. And coming from both, North Carolina and Oklahoma, both which have, really strong brands and very recognizable brands, I do feel like I'm like, we've got some work to do in this space. And really it came down to, I think the core goal was to align the athletics brand with the university. And so in one of the 5 sort of President Casey, wonderful, fantastic president who actually came from DePauw most recently, we had just gone through or the university had gone through a bicentennial rebrand, and it sort of had developed, a new set of branding guidelines, kind of celebrating the bicentennial. But anyway, one of the core things is, how do we align as an athletics department everything that we do, so that it's consistent with the university? And President Casey outlined 5 fundamentals for Colgate's 3rd century. One of those fundamentals was to expand the reach and reputation of the university. Like, let's make it be that a kid from Missouri can know about Colgate and understand what really unique value proposition that we offer. And so in athletics, I really think, especially at a school like Colgate, one of our functions and one of the ways that we add value to this endeavor is by going to places and being in spaces that otherwise the university might not have an opportunity to be in. And so I said it many times throughout that process, we need to wear the banner of the university everywhere we go. So part of it was sort of this alignment with the university. And the other piece was, how do we have a strong, consistent brand across all of our sports? Over the course of time, colors had kind of gotten misaligned, and as different providers, different vendors anyway. So it all needed to be, kind of just aligned. It was really a multi-year process. It honestly started when I first got here to Colgate. I interviewed every member of our staff, and asked a similar set of questions across them to try to distill, like, who are we when we're at our best? Like, what are our current strengths, and what are the things, like, not me coming in and imposing a vision or a, mission or whatever, but how could we just take who Colgate is when we're at our best up a notch and do it more consistently. And so from that, we distilled a vision to be an inclusive community of competitive excellence. And we also identified 5 virtues, those sort of characteristics that people could know us by, if we were living them on a regular basis. And so we wanted our branding to kind of reflect those things as well. So we went through a process, an RFPs process, and we selected SME. It's a Learfield group that does, helps with this sort of work. And we worked with our university communications folks, our internal people. We had everybody involved, from coaches to student athletes. We even got kids from the community involved to kind of get their reaction, and alumni, of course. And I think that, in the end, what all the pieces that we came up with, visual pieces and narrative components, all of them needed to answer the question, why? Like, why is that? Is it critical that piece of it is included, in what we're doing? And when we use it, people need to have, be able to be like, all right, that's Colgate, and this is what it means. So I'm not sure if I got to all of your questions there, but
no, you definitely did. You definitely did. And one thing I did notice how unique it was, that it really looks so much like the rest of the institution. And I think part of that is what I found really actually cool about it was you all have a website if people are interested in looking at the new athletic identity, and you have a great video for one, tying the past to the present. And if anyone's going through a branding or considering it or just curious about it, I will put that link in the show notes. But I like the history elements in it. You all have the Gate script logo at 13 degrees and 13 stripes in it to recognize, or 13 stripes in I forget what you call that logo, but
the shield.
The shield, yeah. And so
student athlete shield.
I didn't realize what that was until I watched the video, and it was to recognize the 13 Colgate founders that offered $13, 13 prayers, and created 13 articles for a constitution. And I imagine that was very popular among the university stakeholders, including alums of the institution and previous athletes. And you all kept I know the C is really important to the past. And so I just think that, tip of the hat to the history of the institution is just something you don't necessarily see the detail. And so whether that was you all or that was the group that came in to help, that was, I think, a nice touch that's gonna transcend to different community stakeholders.
Yeah, it was, in a lot of ways, it was really just about sort of speaking back to our people who have been here, what they know to be true and meaningful about this university and their experience. Every student that has come through here knows the story of the 13 founders and the $13 and 13 prayers and 13 articles. And so it was a way to, and it's also kind of thinking about what makes Colgate really special, what makes us unique. And it is about the education that you get here. That's the first thing, that it really is about. It is about the fact that we have more than 200 years of history as an institution. And it's about that athletics and having an athletics campus, an athletic campus, a physically active campus is really kind of a part of our core identity. And so those pieces were received well. And my hope is that it's a brand that can, serve the university well for many, many years to come.
Yeah, there's what it reminded me of when I think back to, I had the athletic director at Harvard on, and she had told me we talked about the Radcliffe College and how their women's crew team wears black and white for Radcliffe College, which was one of the sister colleges, and so it's basically looking back at history, that they were proud of their history. And even though it was separate than the rest of the athletic department, it was still about this importance of connecting the institution and in the athletic department. And so that example, and then Colgate's example of how you tied everything together is maybe it's because they're both kind of elite institutions in the Northeast. I don't know, but those are two branding actions that I think are awesome. And I was really impressed with the rollout of it. It probably didn't help it was during a pandemic, but I talked to Mike Hill at Charlotte, and they had a similar thing where they had already bought all the new gear, and so they had to release the new logo. But nonetheless, I think the video and did a great job of kind of the release, but maybe it took a little zest out of what you all wanted to do with the rollout.
Yeah, we had planned actually to roll it out in the spring of 2020. We were going to do a fashion show with the student athletes and, the whole bit. And we also had, negotiated a new partnership with Under Armour the year before. And so we were kind of trying to pull all these things together. And at some point, yes, in last fall, before we started competing, we're like, well, we got the stuff, we're going to start wearing it, we got to roll it out. And it didn't feel like a great time to do it, but at the same time, we did it, we did it right around Colgate Day. So Colgate Day is every Friday the 13th, we consider to be Colgate Day, and all Colgate alums, wear their Colgate gear. And anyway, so there was it wasn't actually a Friday, but it was November 13th, and we rolled it out on that day. And it gave us, I think it did give everybody a little bit of a spark in an otherwise kind of dreary time where athletics hadn't started back up yet for us. But it was just about to, and so I think it worked out okay. It wasn't quite the celebration we might have hoped for, but it's gone really well, and it's been well accepted.
Sticking to that 13 strong with the Colgate Day being on the 13th, it's clever. So I want to start wrapping up, and one thing I found interesting is just thinking back to how I got my start in college athletics, and it kind of reminded me of a fellowship program. And Colgate has an athletic administration fellowship program, and it seems new recently. So can you tell us about that program and what that individual's role is throughout the fellowship, what they can expect? Because even though it seems like a newer program, it just seems like a great way to get someone's start in college athletics that maybe, fellowships are pretty popular in higher education, but maybe not in athletics. So you can kind of maybe just expand on the thinking behind that and then what the actual role is.
You bet. So totally goes back to my experience as a PhD with my PhD in counseling psychology. So in counseling and clinical psychology, you do the coursework, then you go away, you do a year of a predoctoral internship. And then you need to get an additional 2,000 hours of supervised service after that internship, and then pass all your exams and all that, in order to get licensed as a practitioner. And oftentimes, and so there's it's a fellowship year, typically, and sometimes they're organized fellowships, sometimes you make it yourself, but it's another year of supervised experience, but it's more advanced, supervised experience. So it really came from that concept, where and actually started thinking about it back at Oklahoma, where we would have, we had graduate assistantship or graduate assistants, sometimes who would be just like really rock stars that you would love to have hired. But it's like at Oklahoma, you don't get your first job out of grad school typically at an Oklahoma, because the candidate pool, the competition for those entry level jobs is super high. And so started to think about, gosh, what if we could do that, where we could let someone cut their teeth at this level in this space, whether it was somebody internally or that we were recruiting. And also started thinking about, how do we do this where we also get more women and people of color, back into our profession and rising through the ranks a little bit faster, and where we could provide that additional supervision and guidance and mentorship. So I got to North Carolina, didn't actually get it off the ground in Oklahoma, got to UNC, and Bubba allowed me to establish one there. And so did a hire and actually had a couple of different fellows there at UNC. So when I came here, it's essentially transferred the idea to Colgate, and even it's been even more helpful here because we have a very small graduate school, and it's in education. It's not really, it doesn't translate well for the GAs that you typically have in athletics. But the role of that person is they get to be involved in almost everything that I'm doing, that my deputy's doing, that our executive team is doing. We give them a taste of it all. They sit in on my senior team meetings, along with every other senior associate AD or an associate AD, and then as we have a little bit more time with them and they start to understand what where their specific interests lie and where they want to go deeper, then we sort of use them in that way, or connect them with the people that can provide more of those experiences. But we look for people that have flexible mindsets, that are eager to learn, that are coachable, that are passionate about this industry, but either maybe haven't, the person who's in that role now actually went into a different industry for a while. I was a student athlete, and he's getting his master's degree while he's here, but just doing a great job and helping in lots of different ways. So anyway, we hope that it then becomes a good stepping stone for them as well, to be able to, advance in the profession at maybe a little bit faster rate than they might have.
Yeah, I felt like back in 2012 when I did my internship, I felt like it was a fellowship because I got to do so many different areas similar to that. And back then, I say back then like that was that long ago. I don't want to act like it was forever ago, but I had to do a 10 credit internship. And now, at most colleges, you only get to do like a 3 credit internship or something like that. And it's like, I did almost 2,000 hours, and now you can get away doing like 500 or less. And I'm like, if I didn't do all those hours, I probably wouldn't even be in college athletics, just because I got so many great starts. So it's great to hear about that program, and it kind of shifts into my last question really nicely. And you earned a PhD in counseling psychology, like you said, and with an emphasis in sports psychology. And you studied this topic arguably before it was as widespread as it is today to talk openly about, the field of sports psych and maybe the mental health of athletes. Would you say you still apply things you learned in your doctoral program in regards to whether it's how you assess the student experience? And I'm sure that kind of goes into, your own experience as well, and in how you lead coaches and staff. And if so, maybe you can just expand on some of those similarities. We saw it with the fellowship program, bringing that over from your background, but what about the actual training involved from the program?
Yeah. It's when you go through a training program or an experience like that, I think that it changes you. You hear people talk about how law school trains you how to think and or how to problem solve, whatever. I think a PhD in counseling or clinical psych does a similar thing. It just changes the way you see people and relationships and all that. And I was in a scientist practitioner program, so there's also a way that you learn to think about data and and utilize data in decision making and program development, et cetera. So I think it probably colors just about everything that I do in some ways that I don't even know. But specifically as it relates to assessing the student athlete experience, that is really the core of what we do and what we were trying to deliver. And from in the very first week, my first time with my staff, I identified sort of my 3 expectations of everybody on our staff, from myself all the way through coaches, to our administrative assistants and everybody in between. The 3 expectations that I have are to love, listen, and lead. And while those aren't necessarily sort of counseling psychology things, I mean, when we look at love, I mean, that's a little bit kind of a weird thing to be talking about in athletics, maybe. But the point of that is that this is about relationships, and it's about caring about each other. It's about respecting one another. It's about, going through. I mean, this is all just a vehicle for our life experiences. And we spend so much time here that if we move through this time without experiencing, without giving love to people, without receiving it, without using that as a foundation for our decision making, we will have missed the whole point. And so, so I think that listen, I'm literally a trained listener as a counselor, but it is about like people need to be heard. They want to be heard. They want to be seen. They want to be heard. They want to be valued. And we oftentimes in athletics do a great job of talking at people and coaching people and giving them things, but it's like, these are really active learners and they need to be listened to as well. So, and then lead is just about finding something, in your realm of influence and that you want to make better and you can make better and take somebody with you. And so, there's a lot of that that's relational. There's a lot of that that's about, creating a healthy and generative environment for people to thrive in. And I think all of that eventually, kind of goes back to that space of how to, for a counselor, it's like, how do I help facilitate someone to become better, become more effective, become more functional, whatever it might be. And so I'm sure it's there.
Well, you make a great point about about love, because I mean, we are dedicating our lives to this area, and if you can't enjoy it, then because there's a lot of hours that goes into working in college athletics, and hopefully most people, they can still include their family in that role too. But the people you work with also you see them more than your family a lot of times. And so, I work at IU, and so we have adopted our football coaches LEO, love each other motto, and it's stuck, and now it's kind of taken the area by storm, and but it is true. And so I guess the last thing I always say that's the last question, then I always forget that I leave the last one open for advice. So I'm selfish in the questions that I ask are really for me because I'm interested in them, and that's the point of the podcast. But getting to share that with whoever listens too. I assume that most of the listeners are either prospective athletic administrators or current athletic administrators. Maybe what are some advice that you would give to those aspiring individuals that are listening and might want to go up this path of college athletic administration and maybe be an AD one day?
Yeah. Interestingly, I don't know that this leads my advice list usually, but the thing that's coming to mind is learn. Do whatever it takes to keep learning. And I think if you're doing that, you're remaining sort of open-minded. You sort of are constantly looking for and taking on new challenges. You're pushing yourself out of that, the day-to-day comfort that you might find or day-to-day grind. And you know, in athletics, all of us have a lot of things we have to do, you know, just to make the trains run on time. But if you're constantly looking to learn, you're also kind of always looking to get better. And I think that when you, and also connect with people. I mean, you know, it's like in athletics, you got to learn, you got to, you know, sort of access people who are around you, which is another huge component, I think, of advancing in athletics, is just be good to people and reach out to them and ask questions and really seek to learn from those who are around you and those that you may see from afar. Like, I rarely have had an experience where I've reached out, sometimes made cold calls to people to say, hey, can you offer any advice on this thing? Or can you tell me how you did that? And people are so generous in this profession. But a lot of folks don't actually take that step to then go and do and learn and ask the questions. So I guess boiled down to one thing, encompassing all of that stuff, it's really just keep learning at the forefront.
Well, I wholeheartedly endorse and agree with that, because, you know, I do the podcast, but I do reach out for just, you know, non-recorded conversations too, because you can just learn a lot by just asking people in this industry to talk. And I've taken some tips that I've talked about in the past for people is, you know, all of us work at college campuses. Most of us have the ability to maybe not do a whole degree, but maybe you can take a class and you might have a tuition benefit. It's a big reason why I took my current job, is so I could start my doctoral program and not have to pay full price for it. But people can do that. I think, you know, how you leverage your experiences at conferences. And I just, you know, we haven't had a true in-person conference since I started really this podcast 2 years ago. And, you know, now 40 episodes later, I'm thinking like, it's going to be fun to finally meet a lot of the people I talk to on Zoom. And so, but just the learning thing, and that's also, I'll end it with a plug of, if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, I try to ask good questions. So you can keep learning from people like Dr. Nicki Moore. And so, Nicki, I just want to end it by, you know, thanking you again for taking some time out of your day to talk about Colgate University and talk about your career in intercollegiate athletics and higher education. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.